quickly, as far as my involvement, it started out in 1980. I was at the time attending Calvary Chapel Downey, and I was involved in their financial stuff at the church, and I was one of the counselors there. And Montebello Police Department was starting a chaplains program, and I was also involved in counseling and such. And so the head counselor who was involved with the chaplains program says, "Oh, I think Scott would do a pretty good job of this." So they invited me out, and I was been riding in police cars for a long time, and and I got to know about the politics of the cities, and especially how it interacted with police departments at the time. And then after a while, I think I wanted to do it earlier, but my wife said, no, you got some kids at home. And so it wasn't until my youngest turned 13 that I said, "Sweetheart, I'm going to run for city council," because at the time we had 5 members of the city council, and they were just back and forth. It was 3-2 council all the time, and they would spend more time arguing about things than getting things done. So I finally said, we've had enough. And so I ran for city council. I was on city council for 15 and a half years, a 4-time mayor there. And, it was fun because we finally had a group that all were focused in the same direction. Now, that doesn't mean we always agreed, but we always had, what was best for the community in our hearts. The thing that I came quite prepared to do, I think, is to talk about some insights that I think the Lord has given me as far as, controlling spending, and, point out how people kind of just squander money at times. In my CPA practice, I have people who are, uber rich, and I have people who barely got 2 nickels to rub together. And so I'm going to kind of presume, too, that whole gamut is here in this august group. I'm not any type of biblical scholar, but, my business as a CPA is, discussing some practical applications, and I try to keep that from spiritually sound principles. So, money issues. Probably the number one item that causes divorce. Couples are always fighting about money and spending, and some of it's a daily routine, and others it's just on occasion. But it's certainly part of the stress of pretty near everybody's life. So, I'm going to kind of talk a bit about people who have a lot of money, and work down to people who don't have a whole lot of money, and maybe somewhere in there you'll find something that applies to you in your life. But if we start off with those people who have been so richly blessed, if you're well off, along with that wealth comes tremendous responsibilities. I mean, seriously, if you're one of those people who have a lot of money, you really need to pay attention to what the Lord is telling you. I think there's a scripture that says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. Now, as I understand it, and if I'm wrong, somebody I'm sure will correct me, the eye of a needle is not this thing. I think it's an opening at the wall that goes around the big cities, and when they got the big gates closed and stuff, if there's an emergency, they can kind of sneak people in and out of this little opening, and they used to call that the eye of the needle, as I understand. And so try to get a camel through that is pretty tough, but it's not impossible. So, for those people, they want to think, it's mine, got a lot of money, it's mine, I earned it. It's not yours. And it just creates a whole new set of problems. Responsibilities, now shift to supporting needy organizations and individuals, because those are the ones that have the ability to be generous without expecting anything in return. And I really seriously believe that the Lord generously blesses these people for exactly those reasons, to share that. Remembering, of course, that it's not yours, it's His. Be mindful of what expectations that the Lord has concerning how you spend, or maybe how you hoard your money. There's always a lot of temptation. I found this even in my work with the city. People who have a lot of money and people who have a lot of power tend to get big heads, because there's always somebody telling them what a great job they're doing, or can you help me with this? And so they tend to think that they're the cat's meow, and it's a lot of temptation that accompanies that type of power and wealth. So people treat them differently, and their heart kind of changes, and you have to be really mindful of that. So I encourage those that are well off to methodically support their church, or giving singularly to gifts of other ministries who do the work in their area. You just get this feeling that the Lord is saying, I want you to help these, whether it's a children's hospital or a soup kitchen or disaster relief or whatever. But whatever the Lord puts on your heart, because if it applies to you, have been richly blessed. Lord expects more from you. Other ways could be maybe including, hosting an event or some sort of benevolence with a very quiet spirit. So I'm going to move on now, let's say, to taking some time to talk to you about probably some of you who have a fair amount of assets. You're not really struggling all that much financially. Maybe you don't have a financial advisor or a CPA that you can discuss your questions and concerns with. So let's talk about a few of these. One of the things I talk about a lot with people is succession planning. We gotta plan for when that day comes, and if you've got a house and a couple of cars and maybe a bit of money in your 401k and that kind of thing, well, how is that going to go on to your beneficiaries, your heirs? And there's lots of ways we can transfer our assets to those that we want to have it. There are wills. We're going to talk about wills, because that's probably the worst way to do it. Trusts, beneficiary statements, co-ownership, those types of things. So how many of you do any of you have a family trust? 1, 2, okay, 3, 4, okay, yes. How many of you have your will done? Probably just a few more than what we had before. I jokingly say, when people ask me, I said, yes, being of sound mind, I spent it all. Hopefully on the things the Lord wanted me to. So, first of all, I'm not here trying to hand out business cards or that type of thing. I'm not looking for clients. I'm just trying to pass on some knowledge that I think the Lord has blessed me with. So be glad to answer any questions anytime you see me here at church. I'm not trying to bill anybody. Just feel free to take advantage of that. So, there's lots of ways of transferring. As I said, wills and trusts and beneficiary statements and adding people to your title, and that can be either through joint tenancy or community property or tenancy in common, and all these things will transfer rather easily to the surviving owner. But there can be other issues in that as well. And one of the things I always encourage my clients is to avoid probate. Probate is long and costly and miserable. So we do that. We can do that through co-ownership. So husbands and wives, we own things as joint tenancy, or we have a community property those kinds of things. Tenants in common, maybe myself and my brother want to own something together. Tenants in common. Now, tenants in common is kind of tough. Sometimes there's ways of holding title that he who lives the longest gets it all. So as people die off, their share goes to the other owners. Those may be things the way you want it, maybe not, but those are different ways. But if you add your children to the title of your possessions, that can create a few problems. If you want to sell your home or transfer it, you got to go to your children and get their permission because you added them to the title and they're going to sign off. They have to sign off on it. So that can be a problem at times. Beneficiary statements. So when you go to a bank or you're to open an account, or maybe you have a little account at Charles Schwab or one of those, one of the questions they will probably ask you is that if something happens to you and you pass away, who do you want to get this money? And that's through a beneficiary statement. And so you can say, if I die, give it to my spouse. If she's not around, give it to my 3 kids or whoever you want. But that bypasses probate. They're going to look to that document rather than to the court about how to move those assets on to the beneficiaries. Family trusts. So I kind of want to give you an example of the cost of probate. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. In a trust, you create this document, and that trust, that set of papers, not you, but that set of papers owns your assets. And you say, well, when I'm gone, somebody new is going to step in, like having a new president of a corporation. If the old president of the corporation dies, that corporation keeps on going because the next day they got a new president. So family trust, we call this governing from the grave, because you can say in that document, you know, my son John, who can't hardly save money at all, I'm going to put a spendthrift paragraph in there that he only gets so much a month, but my daughter who's working in the ministry, I want her to get all of hers at the same time. I mean, you can be really, really flexible with a document and all the provisions inside of a family trust. But you really need to think about who's going to be that successor trustee, because there's immense power given to that successor trustee. You have to trust them to do what the trust document says. Don't create your trust on LegalZoom. Sorry, I see this from time to time. God, I got a great trust document here. Oh, good. Yeah, Dad had that done, and 4 years ago we knew he was going to pass away, so he went to LegalZoom, did this great trust. See, here it is. There's nothing in the trust. There's no asset. The trust document only governs what you put in the trust. And if you don't put anything in it, the trust is worthless. So LegalZoom will create this really nice trust, but you got nothing in it, so it's worthless. So if you spend a couple of grand on a proper trust, you'll save quite a bit of money, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And usually when you go to an attorney and have these done, not only are they doing the trust, but they're doing the medical power of attorney, deciding who's going to make the decisions when you pass away, or if you got to, whether you should get a certain treatment or not get a certain treatment, or do you want a DNR, do not resuscitate, then there's pour over wills, and and you can even have a page that says all this personal property, I want Mom's ring to go to my daughter Janie, and I want my hunting rifle to go to my son Michael, and you can do very flexible things inside of that trust. And then sometimes, some of us have challenged children who maybe even can't hold a job, and so or they may have a disability, and we have special needs trusts, and we can make we can create a special needs trust for Sam over here because he was born with cerebral palsy and he's on state welfare, and state pays for most things. But the minute you give that person a part of your estate, all those benefits go away, and we don't like that. So we create a special needs trust that says the special needs trust will pay for the things that only pay for the things that the state doesn't pay for. And we're going to come down to a will. Yuck, boo. This doesn't avoid probate. It's the last choice for transferring assets. So let's just talk about the cost of a probate on a modest estate. So let's say we have a couple, and together they've been together 50 years, they've raised their 2 kids, they're retired, they have a house that's worth $500,000, but it's got a $150,000 mortgage on it. They have 2 cars that are all paid for, worth, they're not really expensive cars. Let's say they're worth about 10 grand. They have a 401k that's got 100 grand in it. They have a cash and a savings account of about 40,000, and they have a little stock portfolio worth 50,000. Now, if I've done my math right, that gross assets is $750,000, but then you take the $150,000 mortgage off, so they got a net assets of $550,000. Presuming there are no beneficiary statements, the bare minimum cost of probating that estate would be $17,000 to the attorney, another couple $1,000s to the court, and then if the executor wants to get paid, there's another $17,000 or $18,000. So you're talking $30,000 or $40,000 on a pretty simple item. All of that avoided by using a trust. So all these big costs, that's why we want to avoid probate. For those of you who say, I asked you, do you have a will? And many of you did not raise your hand. I'm here to tell you that each and every one of you has a will. Whether you wrote it out or your attorney wrote it out, if you didn't do either of those, the state of California has written a will for you. Isn't that special? You're going to entrust all of your possessions and everything to what they think is best for you. So in their infinite wisdom, they've written one. Yes, my ladies and gentlemen, the politicians in California have decided what's best for your loved ones if you die without a written will or any other written plan of succession. Let's move on. How many of you have credit cards? Few of you, yes. You don't need a show of hands on this next question. How many of you are paying in full the balance of those credit cards in a very timely manner? If you have a good record of paying in full, the full balance, and maybe on a rare occasion you make a late payment, a quick phone call usually gets them to waive those fees. So if you are normally paying it all off, and suddenly you're on vacation when that payment comes due, and they want to assess some penalties, they want your business. And so you can call them and say, you know what, I've been a long-time customer. I always pretty much pay my everything on time. Would you please waive those for me? Because I don't want to go to your competition and take my business somewhere else. Would you please waive that? 90% of the time they'll say yes. We will do that for you. A lot of us succumb to impulse buying. Have you noticed, and getting back to credit cards before I go into that, every time you go to the cash register at one of those department stores, what do they always say? Are you going to put this on your charge? Oh, you don't have a charge account here? Would you like a charge account here? I'll give you 20% off at today's purchases if you'll open up a credit card here. That's all just a temptation because they know that you aren't going to make those full payments all the time, and they're going to make a ton of money off of the interest charges and everything else. So Man, you want to avoid that. And I'm not saying completely do credit cards. For some of you, I'm going to say don't have a credit cards, but it's a lot of money goes out to those interest charges every month. So pay that ding-dong thing in full every month. When I was in high school, one of the classes available was called Home Economics. This class taught you how to budget your money and how to meet your current needs and plan for the future, and it taught you how to balance a checkbook. And so, how many of you really know exactly how much money you have in your bank account and have a good grasp of what your bills are going to be over the next 30 to 60 days? Good, a few hands up there. How many of you, I need a no show of hands, I wonder how much I have in the account. Let me go to the website. Oh, the bank thinks I have this amount of money in there. Wrong. Seriously, they don't know about what checks are still out there and haven't cleared yet. So they may tell you you've got $850 in there, but they don't know about the $350 check you wrote yesterday. So you really have to pay attention, seriously. Have a check register that keeps track of your balance with every transaction. You can always create it in Excel. This is a great program, and it's really not that hard. And do you think the bank never makes a mistake? So how are you going to find it if you're not paying attention to this? If you don't know how much you have in your account, you're destined to have checks bounce. And when you have a check bounce, then you have bounce check charges, which depletes your balance, and then the next check bounce because you weren't planning on that other fee. So you get this kind of domino effect. And so it's really, really important to keep track in whatever is good for you of just exactly how much you have in your account. So another thing is we have to discipline ourselves from impulse purchases. There's reasons why they put all of those overpriced sodas and candy and tabloid magazines right there where you're waiting in line, because they want you to pay $1.50 for that 40-cent can of Coke. And we get this, I got to have it. It's right there, and I'm kind of thirsty. But think back to when Mom and Dad were raising us, and we said, Mom, can we? And they said, no, wait till you get home. Something that I've seen, too, that's just a complete waste of money, is citations, tickets. Seriously, California stops, all right? You're saving 3 seconds by not stopping, and yet when you get pulled over, and they write you that ticket, and it costs you $350, was it really worth the 3 seconds? Was parking in an improper place really worth the $50 or $60 fine? These are all just wasted money. And then when you get those tickets, the insurance goes up. So it's not just the singular cost, it's continual costs. And how about all of the pressure that we get from advertising, thinking about Christmas presents and birthday presents and purchases that overindulge in holidays like Valentine's Day and Mother's Day. Mother's Day may be an exception for all the mothers out there. Halloween, New Year's, 4th of July, and on and on. There's all this pressure to show how much we love people and how, we're going to all these gifts that we can't afford. Seriously, people, dial it down. Dial it down to what you can afford. So you really kind of want to look for opportunities. The Lord provides lots of opportunities in life. And it's not that unusual to be presented with opportunities. The problem comes when we don't recognize them as an opportunity. And we don't recognize it because it usually comes wearing a pair of overalls and it looks a lot like work. It probably is work. But if you're in need of a little extra money and someone offers to pay you to mow their lawn or clean their pool, how about the football game is on? Right? Passing up an opportunity. What do you think you should be doing? Or someone offers to pay you to help them maybe clean their house, or what the bridge club is meeting. The Lord is giving opportunities to meet your needs. Perhaps maybe you're choosing another path. Do you have a plan to pay unexpected bills like car repairs and medical expenses? Dave Ramsey has really got a great program, and I'm not here trying to sell his books, but he does a really good job, and he's got seminars and such. And my son is now with Dave with that whole program, and my son had to file bankruptcy and had some real struggles because he was just kind of out there lackadaisical. But when it really kind of hit him, it taught him a lesson, and now he follows that program, and he's now paid off all of his schooling debts, and paid off all of his credit cards and all of that. It's a system of putting cash into various envelopes, one for groceries and one for rent and one for utilities and one for... It really works. So if you're struggling, I would encourage you to kind of look into that. And then I see, a lot of newlyweds. Oh, mom and dad had this, so we got to have it. They can't afford it, but they got to have it. That is just... It's just a waste of money, and it's going to get them in a whole lot of problems. And it's, and in buying a car, have you seen how the salesmen kind of work? He comes and, oh, you want this car? Okay, well, that's going to cost you $500 a month. They haven't really talked about how much the car costs. They talk about it's going to be $500 a month. Oh, I can't afford $500 a month. Well, let me see. How about $450 a month? Now, what they've done is, instead of paying for 5 years, now you're paying for 6 years. And you're paying an extra $1,800 to $2,000, but, now it's $450. Well, I can't afford $450 either. All right, well, let's go with $400. They're not talking about the price of the car. They're talking about the monthly payment. And if you're leasing a vehicle, I try, most of my clients when they call and say, well, should I buy or should I lease? And I ask them, well, can you afford the down payment? And if you can afford the down payment, you should purchase the car. And let me tell you this. In a lease, they don't tell you what the interest rate is. In a lease, they've gone back and they've figured out, okay, the car is worth this much today, and it's going to be worth this much when they bring it back for 4 years from now. And so that differential, we're going to split up over 48 payments and add some interest. And instead of being the 3 or 4% that you can get at a credit union or such, it's probably more like 9 to 12%. But they don't have to tell you what the interest rate, the implicit interest rate is. So if you can afford the payments, I would suggest you buy the car, because once you've finished the payments, you own the car. You don't have to give it back. Some time ago, and I think it's still out there to some extent, there were preachers talking about, oh, you're a king's kid. You're one of God's children. You should be living like a king's kid. You could just name it and claim it, and by golly, you're going to get it. That is not theologically sound. These types of spiritual lifestyles reek of really ungodly expectations. And if the Lord were to saw to it that you got all of your wants. Oh, I got to have that because I'm a king's kid, or that's really nice. I'm going to live by faith and know that God's going to arrange for me to have it. I claim it. We would become spoiled brats, unappreciative, self-focused, narcissistic people who have forgotten where all these blessings come from. Such expectations would impair our growth in our relationship with the Lord, and we would be like little children at Christmas, tearing open one present, and before appreciating that, we're moving on to the next present. That's really not what the Lord wants in our relationship with Him. We would become focused on the gifts, not the giver of those gifts. And as Christians, our responsibility is mainly two things. Remember, to love the Lord with all our heart and to love others as we love ourselves. So God's responsibility to us as Christians are to facilitate that growth in our relationship with Him and to meet our needs. Now, meeting our needs doesn't mean providing all of our wants. That doesn't mean that the Lord doesn't want to bless us, but do you think He's going to give you something that will ultimately get between you and your relationship with Him? Your relationship with Him is the most important thing. It's more important than anything else. And it's certainly much more important than that fleeting want, which probably will change shortly after we get it. If wealth or things would become a hindrance to that relationship with Him, then He's not going to give them to you. There will be many other blessings. They could be related to your health, your job, friendships, lots of different things. So people who espouse living like a king's kid or name it and claim it, that runs counter to the Lord's responsibility to us. We shouldn't fret over things, especially at the cost of the loving relationship with God Almighty. Our heart is the indicator of our spiritual relationship with the Lord. Your heart needs to be focused on loving the Lord and helping others. So how do we change our attitude and those expectations? Of course, it starts with prayer, a prayer for a change in our heart, and recognizing that things that God has already blessed you with and continues to bless you with. Thank Him often for those things, those blessings. Show Him that you can be a good steward of what He has already given you. Pray for wisdom. I can't emphasize anything more than that. Pray for wisdom. Brothers and sisters, I can't emphasize this point because you're asking for a good thing. The Lord wants to give you wisdom. And as you become more proficient and well-disciplined, a good steward of what He has given you, well then perhaps, credit card with a little balance, a little low balance, credit limit rather, can be introduced. But again, you have to put away cash to pay off those every time balance comes due. So as we finish up, I want to ask you, what is your hope? What does your heart ache for? What does your mind dwell on? And my message to you is this, that if your hope is in the saving grace of the Lord's sacrifice, if your heart aches to do the will of the Father and love Him, and if your mind dwells on serving the Lord and others in need, and how the Lord is leading you in those goals, then His blessings will be more and more abundant. And this is the process of His blessing, remembering that the blessing itself is not the goal of our behavior, but the desire to love and serve the Lord. So thank you for your attention. Thank you, Pastor, for giving me a few minutes to share and the opportunity to be with you. And I'd be glad to stick around and answer any questions that you may have. But get involved Um, and it doesn't have to be in politics, but whether you're involved in some ministry here at church, or you're involved in a a neighborhood watch, or somewhere in your community, it's time to spend some time in those endeavors as well. And